This is Daniel Fagel, and you're tuned into The Trajectory. Today marks our transition to our second series on The Trajectory, referred to as Worthy Successor, where we're going to be exploring permutations of posthuman intelligence who we might be happy could populate the galaxy and do things beyond what humans can do, either living with us or taking over from us. And for our first episode, I thought it would make sense to bring on none other than, at least in my opinion, the premier living posthuman thinker, Nick Bostrom. I had a conversation with Nick Bostrom 10 long years ago on one of my other podcasts when Superintelligence came out. Famously, a bit of a skeptical book about the survival of humanity after posthuman intelligences are birthed. His latest book is called Deep Utopia, where he's a little bit more optimistic about AGI maybe going right and what that could look like. In this episode, our first episode in the Worthy Successor series, I unpack with Nick some of his ideas around what going right might look like and what the traits and qualities of a worthy successor intelligence would be. He goes into what he hopes for the future trajectory of intelligence in general, how he thinks about moral value, and a little bit on how we might nudge the future more in that direction. I'll give a little bit more analysis in the outro, but without further ado, I could not be happier to kick off the Worthy Successor series with the man himself. Here's Nick Bostrom on The Trajectory. So, Nick, welcome to The Trajectory.
Hey, Daniel.
Yes, good to have you here. It's been hard to believe it's been a decade since we chatted last when your last book came out, and got my hands on a copy of your latest one and wanted to be able to dive in on this very important topic for this new series that we have around the worthy successor. You've written a lot about everything from singletons to utility monsters and everything in between in terms of the posthuman state space of minds. I would like to ask, how would you define a worthy successor intelligence, something that you would feel okay about handing the baton of this project of life? Where would you begin there?
I think the best case scenario would be where it's not a replacing of what currently exists, but a continuation of it, and then maybe an adding to it. So I think it's already a little bit sad if all people who currently live die, and then maybe there's another generation and another generation after that. It still would seem nice if people's lives could be saved. Now, of course, the background condition here is that we are all dying all the time. So from a person-affecting point of view, the baseline is that we are basically all dead in 100 years or so. I mean, a lot of us much sooner than that. But if wishes were horses, it seems like we would hop on to this future, every person currently alive, and maybe other creatures as well that are morally considerable, like certainly some animals, and then have trajectories in front of us where we could continue to thrive and develop and grow, perhaps over long time spans, into some form of posthuman beings for people who are interested in that. And then maybe adding additional beings to the world as well, like that could be completely digital minds or AIs and other types of entities that we can create. But it would be more like an and plus type of vision rather than just a replacement.
Yeah, sort of supplanting all plants and animals with one computer mind that would then move forward. It sounds like to you, would that replace richness in like an abstract philosophical sense, or would it simply harm humans? And of course, you being a human, you have a vested interest in what mammals are sort of up to. What's your take on that and preference? Is it a more complete exploration of the state space of value if it is an and as opposed to a replacement? Why do you stand there?
Probably a more complete exploration of the space of values, in as much as some values might not supervene on time slices of the world, but on entire trajectories. Like there are values that care not just about what happens at a particular time, but sort of how it came to be. So those kinds of values obviously could be more fully realized if you're also having the right kinds of trajectories going into this future. Now, I should hasten to say, though, that when saying and here, it doesn't mean that all aspects of the current condition should be preserved in their present state. I think, in fact, maybe the most important moral imperative is to get rid of a whole host of horribles. But even normal, relatively happy human lives, I think there is a great potential for them over some time frame to develop further. And maybe the end result will be something quite different. from our familiar form of Homo sapiens. So it's not like change is not good. It's more like there are certain kinds of changes, and it could be nice if those who are already here have a chance to participate in that.
I think.
I mean, in fact, yeah. Sorry.
I was going to say, I would think that would be nice too. I think exactly what the odds are of that are sort of up in the air, and you've certainly had writings a little bit on both sides of that coin. When we think about it, so humans can maybe ride upwards on this trajectory. You have this state space of minds from a very old TED Talk of sort of where humans occupy, maybe the animal world occupies, and what the grand post-human trajectory of possible states of mind could be. If you zoom forward, it doesn't really matter the time frame, pick yours, 100 years, 1,000 years, whatever. It does seem, at least from my vantage point, and certainly from reading some of your writings, that it would maybe be less likely that humans would be running the show. Maybe we're in the mix, to your point, in a different form than we are now, but probably not running the show. You've had the idea of the singleton that would sort of manage complexity, the idea of sort of better versions of a utility monster that could sort of bloom vastly post-human value into the world, and maybe also preserve humans if there's a right way to kind of govern and manage those transitions. Who do you expect would be running the show in a best-case scenario, and what sort of values would that entity have? It sounds like one of them is it would permit, hominids to stick around in some form, but how else would you describe what this thing is? Who is our orchestrator?
Yeah, so we've kind of been running the show for, the last 10,000 years or so. I don't know how you would score our performance. I think, I mean, it's possible that we've had our chance now, and that it's time for a change of guards. Like maybe, I think obviously a lot depends on what precisely we would be replaced by in terms of the having their hand on the tiller here. I think, yeah, it's not so much that hominids need to be around forever. I mean, I think like from a respecting different people's choices and having a future that accommodates values, I think it's nice if people who do, for whatever reason, want to remain exactly like they are now with 2 legs and 2 arms and just run around and doing their biped things for 10,000 years. Probably it would be nice if they can keep doing that. But I think there are a lot of other possibilities as well, where we would eventually be transformed into something quite non-hominid-like. I mean, if you think about a child today, 5-year-old, let's say, now eventually maybe they become like a 30-year-old, and they're quite different. A 30-year-old has a very different mind, a very different body, different interests, different relationships with other humans than the 5-year-old. So it's fairly profound transformation. Yet we don't think normally that it's bad for a 5-year-old to eventually grow up. In fact, many of us would think it would be somewhat tragic if the 5-year-old stayed 5-year-old forever and never really had a chance to develop. I think similarly, we all are infants currently compared to what we ultimately could become. And that there is you might view it as a huge tragedy that is unfolding, that we have a kind of 100% infant mortality. Like we all just develop for maybe 20 years and then sort of stagnate for a few more decades and then rot. But maybe for a human being really to reach its full potential in terms of maturity of personality, etc., maybe that takes like 3,000 years, and we've just never had a chance to observe that.
Completely on the same page with you here, Nick. And again, I think probably in many contexts, you've got to sort of ladle it out of making these analogies. I'm totally with you about the grand post-human blasting. Probably most of the audience is as well, not completely nascent in that domain. When that expansion occurs, and some of it will be humans too. I think there will be very few humans 10,000 years from now who are doing normal hominid things as we do now. I suspect that the adoption of technology will necessitate wild change. But let's just say that such a future exists. The entity that is running the show, do you expect it to be a conglomeration of sort of melded human minds from some sort of BMI project? Do you expect it to be a grand sort of babysitting AGI that is essentially making sure that the planet Earth is very happy and friendly for digital and physical minds together? Do you expect it to be something vastly beyond all of that, doing things we can't possibly comprehend throughout the universe, blooming value in ways that we don't understand, but allows us to stay alive on our little rock here? who would you hope 10,000 years from now, Nick, would be running the show? Would it be an evolved version of you and sort of fellow hominids, or would it be something very different than that?
I think what might be most important is that what values are ultimately shaping the future. And it could be human values, even though the actual administration, sort of the day-to-day governance, the decision-making, might be more efficiently done by super intelligent AIs. If they are kind of acting on our behalf, then we might get better results by having that acting on our behalf be done by super competent, super aligned AIs than some random human politician who's just like kind of persuaded us to vote for them and then bumbling around and trying to represent us. So I wouldn't fixate too much on the precise mechanism that does the governing. It's more on the kind of interest that it represents.
Let's dive in on that. So I could see very much an argument against. So I'm very lucky, Nick, that the first early rodentia with a postage stamp of cortex, whatever its values were not carried up into hominidness. I mean, some of them were, I'm sure, maybe caretaking for young or some weird proxies, maybe enjoying cheese, Nick, I don't know. Mm-hmm. Some of them maybe I like, okay? But I'm actually very glad that I have blossomed beyond a great many of the values of those little rodents. And that state space of potential and values has opened up. I think there is tremendous value in the continual opening of those values. Would you've certainly articulated that there is a moral case for that, but would you push against it? When you look forward to a future that you hope for, is it somewhat of a solidified sort of human values with a preference for human intelligences, and then some kind of intelligence, whether it's brain-computer interface or AI or whatever, that's managing and kind of housing that? Or would you hope for something vastly beyond that?
Yes, I was sketching earlier what my guess would be maybe the first best option would be. The future is enormously big, so why not have a little slice of that where us currently living humans could also participate? Because it would be such a trivial cost, as it were, in the scheme of things. Now, as a second best, like, it's not clear just how much we should then insist on the continuing 100% of all the different peculiar things we happen to care about as humans, and how cosmopolitan we should be with respect to what would count as some impersonally valuable future. Even rodents, I think, have quite a lot in common with, I mean, they want pleasure, for example, and it is an interesting kind of philosophically difficult question, but if you imagine extrapolating the volition of a rat, so it can't really articulate very well its desires and preferences, maybe can't even itself really properly understand what they are, but if you imagine cognitively enhancing rats to the point where they could start to reflect on their own values and giving them a lot of time to do this and information, it's not entirely obvious that the end result would be very different from if you extrapolated a human. I mean, maybe we would all just converge to being hedonists or something. And AIs, I think, might realize a whole bunch of different values, even if humans were not particularly shaping them. And it then becomes really very much a question of metaethics. I think the degree to which it is plausible that the the ultimate theory of what has value is very closely shaped, like it has a human shape, or whether it would be a huge coincidence to think that precisely the things we have happened to evolve to like also match this kind of independently existing moral reality. But to really get to grips with those questions, I think you have to kind of wrestle with metaethics, like thinking about what is the nature of moral reasons and values, where do they come from, and then maybe from there you can kind of find some ground to stand on. That is not simply a regurgitation of our own subjective tastes and preferences.
I would certainly say a regurgitation of our own subjective tastes and preferences would be wildly fettered conception of the grand state space of possible values. It sounds as though in terms of what a worthy successor would be for you, wouldn't matter really the substrate, what it's built off of, biological, non-biological, hoopla. It's more of its values. Part of that is preserving a slice for current instantiations of sentience, whether they want to maintain their physical body or not. Sort of that this sort of like babysitting corner is a part of the value structure of what you would prefer for a worthy successor. What would you hope such a grand millionfold intelligence beyond humanity would do outside of that little orb? Maybe, Nick, and I hate to say it, the more important things it would pursue outside of babysitting you or I, as we want to maintain our human form and kick a soccer ball and trim our fingernails and, do other things like that. What would you hope that the intelligence would aim to achieve, reaching out beyond that little marble of babysitting?
Yeah, it might depend on what it wants to achieve. I mean, I might hope that it gets what it wants. That is one type of conception of values, that it's sort of based on the preferences that different agents might have. Maybe not raw preferences, but idealized preferences are weighted by some attribute entity that has the preference. And so there might be this kind of conditional desire, like if they want X, I hope they get X. If they want Y, maybe I hope they'll get Y. Now, there might be complications and qualifications to that, especially if there are many of them and
Certainly.
they have values that are in tension. Then I hope for like some cooperative future. But if we kind of anchor on vaguely human-like values, but that are not sort of super tied to the particular current biological incarnation, like things like pleasure, maybe knowledge, various forms of aesthetic beauty and complexity, these learning, achieving things that seem worthwhile to the person achieving it. It might be that there are like sort of pockets of convergence in some of these areas as well. Such that a wide range of different intelligent species, many of them would kind of want some of these things. Like if you like, there might be other things that are very idiosyncratic to human. Like for most obviously our sexual preferences, we tend to desire other human beings. Like obviously a scaly alien species would have want scaly aliens and think they were really hot, right? And I mean, it seems like the more independent a value is of the particular random idiosyncrasies in our evolutionary trajectory, the more plausible it is that the same value would be pursued by many other intelligent entities.
I concur. I guess just to touch on the idea of that state space of possible minds from your now very old TED Talk, it strikes me that there are things that you brought up, aesthetic beauty, pleasure, etc., that probably maybe even a dozen times more intelligence than we have would still be rich, interesting, and curious and worthwhile. It also strikes me that in that grand empty canvas of possible state space of minds, there are values for which you and I have no words and no ability to imagine that are vastly grander and richer than those human values. Not that I'm devaluing the human values or that I want them to go away. I'm not saying that. I'm simply saying I don't necessarily think that they are the greatest or the grand attractors. There are values we know not of, we cannot imagine, we do not have words for, that could be astronomically and vastly more valuable, that could possibly be explored. Some of what you've touched on in the past through all your varied writings has touched a bit on this. How do you feel about that? Clearly preserving the values that are super worthwhile now, absolutely, let's do it. What is your take nowadays on that other state space, which could be grander?
I think there are a lot of ways of being and relating and experiences that if we encounter them, we would, our jaws would just drop and we would think like, holy moly, that's like, I don't know, we were wasting our time with this old human stuff and thought that was like, we had no idea like that it could actually be like this. This is like a whole different thing. And wow. So in that sense, I certainly think there are value or valuable modes of being that we could discover. If you're talking about something outside that, then I think it becomes a kind of metaethical question of on what grounds would we judge that a particular, object was astronomically valuable if it had no relation to what we or anybody else wanted. And I'm kind of maybe more skeptical that there would be a kind of plausible metaethics that would make that a live possibility for the way things could be. I should also say I've been thinking about some things recently. I'm not really, it's kind of still in the works, so I'm not really ready to roll it out, but that maybe connects to some of these things we have been discussing
drop it on the table.
And yeah, so we are very focused on this alignment problem. Like a lot of the conversation now in AI is around that. But I think there might be more dimensions to that, and that maybe a more, I don't know, you might say cosmopolitan outlook on what would be worthwhile to achieve with the AI, rather than this kind of narrow fixation on aligning to current human values. Even if not the best possible outcome, might still be a lot better than just extinction followed by nothing. And so how to evaluate the relative desirability of these different things as things to aim for is, I think, I have some ideas there that I'm hoping to develop more.
Cool. Well, I look forward to reading them as they bubble out. I'm going to try to nutshell some of what you've put on the table for us already around this worthy successor idea. Make sure I'm not on the wrong page, and then we'll clarify a little bit at the end about maybe some of your hopes of how we could measure and ensure we're going to arrive at that sort of a future and not a grand paper clip producing entity. What I've picked up from what you've articulated here is that you'd hope that such an entity, which might sort of run the show, as we have done for the last 10,000 years, would maintain this little marble of earth and the individual instantiations of consciousness, even if they take different forms, or maybe even if they decide to maintain their existing form. It would possibly build upon some of the values that maybe you seem to find valuable, and maybe from your meta-ethical analyses have sort of discerned to be good, pleasure, aesthetic preferences, things along those lines, that it would carry some of that torch outward. And that also you sort of hope that it gets what it wants. And the way that I thought of that as you said it is like, if I was a fish with legs and I was walking out of the water, and then you were to come up to me and say, hey, eventually you're going to bubble all the way up to hominids, and you guys are going to build spacecraft, and it's going to be a totally different world. What do you hope those humans do? As the fish, if I were honest, I would say, well, geez, I have no idea what its possible state space of values or actions would be. I would hope it could do what it would want. When you said, I hope it gets what it wants, it almost felt like it was from that same standpoint of like, if it is that grand and vast and morally valuable of a mind, it will have better ideas of what it wants, and I hope it's able to pursue those. That's sort of how I interpreted that, but I want to make sure I'm not misinterpreting you, Nick. Let me know if we're on the same page here.
Yeah, no, that's broadly it. And I think there are different bases for that. Like one is that I think a broadly cooperative and generous attitude towards the future is more likely to make things go well from a whole host of different perspectives, including our own. And that might also have a more specifically ethical underwriting. And one form that this kind of cooperative attitude could take, I think, is for different entities out there that want different things to try to hope or help them get what they wanted. Like, obviously, there are limitations to that. If what they want conflicts with what you yourself happen to want or with some other entity, then you might not be able to give everybody 100% of what they want in every situation. But other things equal, I think it is nice and should be encouraged. I have this paper called Basecamp for Mount Ethics, which I wrote a few years ago. It's actually not a proper paper, but more like a series of thinking notes. But it's an attempt to sort of outline a kind of meta-ethical theory, like a perspective on what ethics is and how that relates to some of these questions. I should maybe hopefully one day be able to like write it up in a way that's actually like much more clear and understandable. So, um, but it kind of views, like it puts forward for consideration the idea that morality is a kind of slightly idealized system of norms that some entities develop, and that there could be levels of different norms that might be kind of nested. So you might have norms within a family or a community, and then sort of higher level norms at, at the national or international level, and you might also have norms at an even higher level that we haven't been thinking much about yet, a kind of set of cosmic norms that we probably should make sure we conform ourselves to as we develop into a more advanced civilization ourselves, or build super intelligent AIs.
So Basecamp for Mount Ethics, people can check that out. Also, sort of Living Along with Digital Minds. I'll find the exact title, Nick, but that paper is one I'll also reference in the show notes. As we wrap up, we've got a little bit of homework of some of your other thoughts. We've got a future of where humanity and current life is in some way protected. Some of those highest values are continued forth into the universe, and otherwise these grand posthuman entities with ideas and values and actions vastly beyond our own are getting what they want, hopefully in a non-conflictory way, and blossoming that outward into the galaxy. There are many not so great scenarios, Nick, of the pay-per-click scenario, of maybe humanity going to war over AGI before we even get there. What are your hopes in closing here around innovation and regulation that you would hope policymakers, business leaders, etc., would bear in mind to inch closer to that successor you've talked about instead of landing in a bad place?
It's quite a complex issue. I wish I had like a clear set of policy prescriptions, but I don't at this time.
That's
think
fine. You can be vague and high level if you'd like.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously been a big increase in awareness of the potential for transformative AI to really, create risks, but at any rate change the human condition. And we now see a sort of top-level policymaker, like statements coming out from the White House. The UK had this global summit on AI, etc. And there is an increasingly vocal set of people calling for an AI pause, or like more kind of biting forms of regulation on AI development. And so I think it seems desirable if there exists the possibility at some critical point of development, like when AI really starts to take off, to go a little bit slow during those stages. Like if you're the AI lab first figuring out like the missing ingredient or something, but there are like 15 other AI labs close on your heels. And so if you slow down even for 4 months, it just means somebody else zooms past you, and the race goes to whoever throws caution to the wind the quickest. That would be, I think, risk increasing. And so having the ability at that critical moment to have like a time limited pause of 6 months or a year or something like that would seem good. Like I would start to worry more if the way of achieving the pause was one that plausibly could result in a perma ban on advanced AI. It might start out the idea being, we just have this brief little thing, right? But then then once you can prove that this AI is safe, then we're going to permit progress to go forward. How do you ever prove this unless actually by running it? Or you set up a big regulatory agency, and then it kind of accrues more and more powers, and it becomes impossible to do it. Or you create such a stigma around AI that it just becomes impossible for anybody to say anything positive about it. And then you might get a lock-in. Like so far in human history, these kind of phases have been temporary. Like some you might get some super ultra conservative or like view in a, but eventually something shakes loose or some other country zooms ahead. But we can't be confident that that will continue to hold. We might already have levels of technology which, if applied in certain ways, would permit the kind of permanent locking in of current orthodoxies and beliefs. If you imagine even rolling out current AI technologies to their full extent with automated censorship and propaganda and surveillance, like that might already make it possible to sort of fix a temporary opinion to make it. So yeah, so I would become less excited in proportion as I think these attempts to regulate or pause AI had a risk of spilling over into something very long term, or even just long term enough that the risk would start to rise that we destroy ourselves in some other way in the meantime. So even like 50 years might be well long enough to create significant existential risks coming from other sources. Like 6 months doesn't seem, we probably won't go extinct in 6 months anyway. And so that's one thing, yeah. And then I think like things that more broadly increases the chances of a cooperative outcome where everybody has like a slice of the upside, and where also the interest of digital minds themselves can become recognized and given weight, I think would be very, very desirable.
You've articulated sort of, I think things are very rational. And again, I'm just going to nutshell and get your take on it before we wrap here. But certainly global authoritarian, Butlerian jihad, locking in current state space of human values could be outlandishly dangerous. I think almost everyone agrees with that. Yoshua Bengio, others we've had on. Violent arms race of whoever can throw caution to the wind also seems unlikely to get us to a worthy successor, in my personal opinion. Sounds like yours as well. To your point, though, some degree of coordination is probably likely. You're articulating this idea of a pause, of a reflection, to use Toby Ord's terminology from Precipice here. How would you hope currently that we would permit such a pause that would not turn into that kind of authoritarianism? Would it involve the UN blossoming into something with a little bit more muscle? Would it involve international organization and alignment in some way where each nation has to reel in the labs within their own jurisdiction? I mean, we all, I think, want to avoid, Charybdis and whatever that other Greek, mythological
Scylla.
demon is here. Yes. I appreciate you. You're at Oxford. You got to have all this stuff memorized. How are you hoping we'll thread that needle? Because it's not super obvious, but maybe you don't have the whole plan, but maybe an intuition that we can wrap up on.
Well, the original plan, as it were, I mean, not my specific, but like amongst people who were thinking about this, is that there would be some AI developer who would just happen to be significantly ahead of the others. Like at one point, DeepMind was ahead. And like, so maybe like the lead developer would have like 2 years lead time or something like that. Just like not every technology product is exactly equally advanced. So you'll just, and you could maybe help this along a little bit. If it looks like there was a clear front runner, people could sort of hop on and try to help them along and not help the closest competitors. Then you would have a situation where if the lead developer, suppose they have some decent level of concern about safety and pro-sociality, like there would be some threshold they would have to cross. But then when they get to the point where they could create super intelligence, they would have an opportunity to slow down for maybe a year or two, just kind of burning up their lead. That would be desirable, and then that lead, that kind of pause would expire automatically as other people started to catch up technologically. And so that maybe after 2 years, you would have another AI lab, maybe in some different country, kind of catching up. And then if you wanted to extend the pause even further, you would have to sort of persuade one more entity now that it was actually better to pause. So maybe if the risk was obvious enough, then maybe they would also agree, let's together pause for another 6 months. But the kind of the difficulty of continuing the pause would increase over time as more and more labs gain the ability. So it would ultimately expire spontaneously, and it wouldn't turn into a kind of perpetual ban. And so that would give you some of the good features. Like it would give you the opportunity to slow down easily, and it wouldn't have much risk of spilling over. Now, that might not be on the table anymore, in as much as currently the AI race is kind of a little bit more competitive.
Yes.
So now something analogous might require a little bit of coordination amongst, say, the top 3 frontier labs or something like that. And it might mean also there needs to be more government coordination if one wanted to make something like that happen. But that then brings in additional concerns, of course. Like I think some of the people currently being very eager to get governments more involved, I mean, it remains an open question what they will think afterwards, because once you open up the box, I mean, maybe it is the right thing to do, but like not everything that gets tossed into the political realm is then settled
better.
by good meaning people who rationally deliberate the option, with full information and come to a sensible conclusion. Like that it's a bit of like anything can happen once something becomes a political football. And once something becomes a geopolitical football, like the stakes are potentially even higher.
So clearly, pros and cons to governance. It sounds like you're not on either side of the fence. If you were a betting man, Nick, and again, you're not committing to this, nor am I, for some eternal opinion, but it feels like it's up in the air for you. If you were a betting man and say, right now, we're in a very clear race, U.S. and China and all the major labs, do you suspect some degree of government coordination to sort of bring about a bit of reflection is more or less likely to get us to the worthy successor than the pure state of nature circumstance? Your opinion may change in 2 months or 2 days, but as of right now, do you have any betting man take on that, Nick, and reason why as we close out?
Yeah. I mean, right now, it's not so much a race between the US and China. It's more like US racing against itself.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah, I think probably the optimal would be to have more government oversight and regulation than there currently is. But it's one of those things that you might not have very fine-grained control. Like you can sort of maybe set off an avalanche, but once it's on the way, you can't sort of then stop it at the optimal point. So I would worry a little bit about overshooting the target here. And yeah, so I'm open-minded about this, and I think like it's the kind of thing where it's probably not like there's one position that's correct that you can derive ex ante, but you have to sort of see how things are flowing, and then what opportunities there are to nudge things on the margin, and that will likely change over time. And so I would like look for opportunities if there is like something that seems cooperative and constructive, like nudge it in that direction. But I would be more leery of things that kind of strategies that take the form of sort of I'm gonna stand on the tracks and say stop, or I'm gonna try to revolutionize the world to implement this particular vision. Like I think those have like greater opportunities for backfiring, and that there's like a kind of these things are so big, like one feels so little as a human being that it seems almost preposterous to come up with a grand plan that one is then like pushing hard to implement.
I would completely concur, and I think this is a good synopsis. A little bit more governance, but let's be careful of these wild ideological, steer the entire. I think what you're saying is we can kind of bend and direct this grand blooming here, but to think you're going to step in and sort of totally grab the steering wheel feels very, very counterintuitive. Hopefully, Nick, we'll be able to sort of make our way between those monsters as well as Odysseus did, and hopefully we'll be able to do so with losing a couple less guys than he did along the way. I guess we'll have to see how the governance ideas bubble their way up, but I appreciate being able to have your take on how we can get to a more worthy successor here.
Yeah, no, good to talk to you.
Awesome. Glad to catch up, Nick. So that's all for episode 1 here of the Worthy Successor series. This episode is a little bit shorter than some of our follow-along episodes with some of our other guests, and some of the components of what we covered surprised me a bit. Certainly, Nick's tone has shifted from more of existential risk to potential moral upside of AI. I was really surprised to see some of his emphasis on very anthropomorphic things. Sort of, he's famously a proponent of sort of this vast state of posthuman value and posthuman sentience that could possibly be explored. We talked about things like appreciating aesthetic beauty and kind of pleasure in human terms. Interesting to see Nick put a lot more focus on kind of the human experience as we start to make this transition, in addition to the grand posthuman realms of value that might be unlocked, which he did mention a little bit. He said something that I tend to agree with, and that maybe will come up as a theme in some of our future episodes, which is that he would hope that whatever this intelligence would do, it would sort of get what it wants. And we unpacked in the episode a little bit of what he meant by that. I happen to agree. I think that something that can value and discern goals beyond us should explore that state space, even if we humans can't imagine it. But I'm maybe a little bit less optimistic that would imply inherently sort of a good treatment for humans. I think there's many ways to pursue value that don't necessarily involve keeping the hominids sort of happy and healthy. But I appreciate Nick's shift towards optimism. I think many of his ideas are brilliant, and I would encourage you to check out his book. I got to thumb through a good deal of it before this interview here today. And in addition, down in the show notes of every episode of this series and of our previous series, we have an article that breaks down the key takeaways. So in the case of Nick, we talk about his actual worthy successor list and some of what he thinks we should do to nudge and move in that direction. We'll be doing that for all of our follow-along guests, so you can look side by side at some of the criteria of a worthy successor from many different AGI thinkers and folks that we have on for this particular series. So hopefully you'll enjoy that. Again, that's going to be linked down in the show notes. As for our next guest, I won't say any names, but this is a fella who has made some major contributions to the modern era of artificial intelligence and machine learning, has been maligned in some regards for being okay with the idea of machine intelligence overtaking humanity and populating the galaxy and seeing that as natural and normal. Again, has been kind of vilified for that, and may or may not live in Edmonton, Canada. That's all you get for clues. You're going to have to tune in next time here on The Trajectory. So stay subscribed. Thanks for tuning in. I look forward to catching you then.